Hi students, welcome to a new session of our course Literary Criticism and Theory. This is part 7 of our lecture series on literary movements. Feminist criticism. Feminist criticism is a theory and practice of analyzing works of art which recognize women's cultural roles and achievements in social, political and literary spheres. So the term feminist criticism applies to those works of art which focus on women's roles and achievements in different areas. An important work of feminist criticism was Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. So you already know who Virginia Woolf is. So Virginia Woolf is an important writer who belonged to the 20th century or the modernist period, and her important work is A Room of One's Own, which is considered to be a seminal work in feminist criticism. So A Room of One's Own is a very important work as far as feminist criticism is concerned. According to her, patriarchy prevented women from realizing their creative potentialities. So according to Woolf, patriarchy is the chief obstacle for the women's progress. So it hinders women's progress and development. So she talks against patriarchy. The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, Sexual Politics by Kate Millett are some important feminist treatises. Let's discuss the basic assumptions and concepts of feminism. The first assumption is that Western civilization is pervasively patriarchal. Male domination subordinated women in all cultural domains: familial, religious, political, economic, social, legal, and artistic. The first assumption says that Western civilization is fundamentally and pervasively patriarchal. Patriarchal means there is a clear-cut male domination everywhere. So there is a male domination in any cultural domain, be it familial, religious, political, so on and so forth. So this male domination subordinates women, and this male domination rules over the entire Western civilization. So Western civilization can be considered as anti-feminist because there is a clear-cut male domination everywhere, and it is chiefly patriarchal. The second assumption is that it is recognized that while one sex is determined by anatomy, the prevailing concepts of gender are largely cultural constructs. So the sex is determined by biology or anatomy, but gender is constructed by culture. So one's culture in which you are rooted in determines your gender. So gender is a cultural construct, and but the sex is biological or anatomical. The third assumption is that the patriarchal ideology pervades those writings which have been traditionally considered great literature and which until recently have been written mainly by men or men. So what constitutes this great literature? So it is chiefly the writings of men written by men for men. So these writings are pervaded, or these writings are chiefly patriarchal in nature, or there is an inherent patriarchal ideology ingrained in these writings which constitute the so-called great literature. So this great literature is chiefly the writings done by men for men. So we call these writings as great literature, and great literature has to be put in double inverted commas because it is spatial. And this great literature, we can see the undercurrents of patriarchal ideology clear. Now, a major interest of feminist critics is to reconstruct the ways we deal with literature in order to do justice to female points of view, concern and values. So the chief objective of feminist criticism is to reconstruct ways in which the feminine works or feminist works or the works written by women have to be taken into account. So it is trying to reconstruct the already available things which are highly male dominated. So this framework has to be reconstructed in order to include the feminine concerns or their points of view. Important term is gynocriticism, which is chiefly related to feminist criticism, and we have already done with this particular topic while we discuss Elaine Showalter's towards feminist poetics. So just going through the term again. The term has been popularized by Elaine Showalter, And Showalter concentrates on women as a writer of literary works. So the chief concern of gynocriticism is to deal women as a writer of literary works, as a producer of literary works. Gynocriticism is a criticism which concerns itself with developing a specifically female framework for dealing with works written by women in all aspects of their production, motivation, analysis, and interpretation, and in all literary forms including journals and letters. So the chief objective of gynocriticism is to develop a female framework for dealing with the works written by women. So that is the catchphrase, to deal with the women by, to deal with the works written by women. So this is a female framework. Psychological criticism. Psychological criticism deals with the work of literature primarily as an expression of the state of mind and structure of personality of the individual author. So just as its name suggests, psychological criticism deals with mind, specifically the mind of author, and it considers literature as primarily as an expression of the state of mind of the author. It treats works of literature as correlated with authors' distinctive mental and emotional traits. So, psychological criticism analyzes works of literature as related to an author's mental and emotional state. So, here the works of literature are analyzed in relation with author's mental state. It refers to the author's personality in order to explain and interpret a literary work, and refers to a literary works in order to establish biography, personality of the author. So it examines author's personality to explain and interpret a literary work. According to John Keble, poetry is the indirect expression of some overpowering emotion or ruling taste or feeling that the direct intelligence is of somehow repressed. So this is an important quote by a theorist named John Keble. So psychological criticism primarily analyzes works of literature in relation with authors' mental state and emotional situations. Another branch of criticism that is closely related to psychological criticism is psychoanalytic criticism. The procedures of psychoanalytic criticism were established by Sigmund Freud. So the theoretical basis of psychoanalytic criticism is derived from the studies made by Sigmund Freud. Psychoanalysis is a means of analysis and therapy for neurosis. So psychoanalysis is considered to be a method of analysis, and it is also the therapy for several mental disorders and the neurosis. Psychoanalysis consider literature and other arts like dreams and neurotic symptoms as the imagined or fantasied fulfillment of the wishes that are either denied by reality or are prohibited by social standards of morality and propriety. So psychoanalysis primarily views dreams and other literature, other arts as imagined or fantasied fulfillment of some unfulfilled desires that are suppressed in our minds. So literature or other arts are considered as expression of those unfulfilled desires that are suppressed in our deeper in our minds. Prominent among these developments was Freud's model of the mind as having three functional aspects. So he has divided the mind into three functional aspects. One is the id, which incorporates libidinal and other desires. So the id stands for libidinal and other desires. The superego, the internalization of social standards of morality and propriety. So that is superego, our notion of values, our notion of morality all comes into superego. And the ego, which tries as best it can to negotiate the conflicts between insatiable demands of the id and the impossibly stringent requirements of the superego. So whatever that is that lies between id and the superego, which is a conflictual position, it is called ego. Ego is something that is being displayed outside to the world. It is that part of mind which is accessible to others, or which is displayed to others. So we have three functional units of mind: id, superego, and ego. Id contains all the libidinal and other desires we have, and the superego is our notion of value system and morality, and the ego is something that is being displayed to others. And it occupies, an ego occupies a conflictual position or a negotiating position between this id and superego. Jacques Lacan, an important figure in psychoanalytic criticism, also known as the French Freud, developed a semiotic version of Freud, applying linguistic theory of social onto the study of psychoanalysis. So another important figure closely associated with psychoanalytic criticism is Jacques Lacan. So he's also called the French Freud. So he developed a newer version of psychoanalytic criticism by combining the linguistic theory of social with the psychoanalysis precepts of Freud. He gave distinction of various stages of development. So he has distinguished between different stages of development of a person. So first is imaginary stage. So imaginary stage is that stage in which the person is an infant and he doesn't know anything about the world. He doesn't know what is self. He doesn't know what others are. So it is the phase of ignorance. It is a phase of unknowing of the reality outside. So imaginary stage is that stage where there is no clear distinction between the subject and the object, or between the individual selves and other selves. So here there is no concept called individual or self. The infant doesn't know what happens outside and doesn't know what happens within him. So within him or her. So the infant is totally ignorant of what is going on outside. So he is just a blank state. He is just a piece of meat, nothing else. Mirror stage. The moment when the infant learns to identify with his or her image in a mirror. So the mirror stage is when the child grows slightly and starts to identify whatever he sees in mirror, and he identifies that whatever he sees in the mirror is his own self or his own image. So that identification comes when the mirror stage enters. So here the infant or the child identifies its image in the mirror. So that is the mirror stage. So this is the beginning of the concept of self. This is the beginning of his conception of self. Symbolic stage, the stage after the acquisition of language. So when the child learns a language, he enters into the symbolic stage. So Lacan has beautifully explained the various stages of development with the help of linguistic theory. First is imaginary stage, when the infant doesn't know anything about others, anything about him or her. So infant is totally ignorant. So this is imaginary stage. He doesn't know anything about the self or individuality. Then the mirror stage, in which the child starts to identify his image in the mirror. He begins to or he understands that whatever so the image he sees in the mirror is just a copy of his, or just a reflection of his own body. Then the third stage is symbolic stage, which happens after the acquisition of language. So here are some follow-up questions for you. One, list some important feminist treatises. Second, what is the chief objective of gynocriticism? Third, briefly explain its superego and ego. Fourth, various stages of development with regard to Lacan's psychoanalytic criticism. I hope you understood this session. If you have any doubts, ask them in the Telegram group. Thank you. Have a nice day.